Coming up on this edition of Pinpoint Weather University.
We are talking the upcoming hurricane season, the latest forecast here from Colorado State University. How many storms could we see and why? And just how warm could the earth get because of this upcoming El Nino that we could see? Could it be the warmest year on record? We'll show you coming up on Pinpoint Weather University.
Meteorologist Brad Lawson alongside meteorologist Andrew Brightman. This edition of Pinpoint Weather University starts right now. Welcome into Pinpoint Weather University. I'm meteorologist alongside meteorologist Andrew Brightman here on Pinpoint Weather University on Queen City News Plus. Andrew, you've been a busy man lately on ground control. Yep. You've been tracking things at Artemis 2 here lately, and honestly, what a magical sight that was over the last couple of weeks. You and our executive producer, Matt Campbell, have been doing some incredible work on that.
I really appreciate that, Brandon. So that was really interesting doing the live stream for the launch here, but I saw you being the tenured professor here at Pinpoint Weather University. I got a little adjunct basis here jumping on the show with you here today. And yeah, we were talking about outer space the past couple of weeks, but we're back to the atmosphere this week. And we're talking about something really, really important here, which is the upcoming hurricane season, which, believe it or not, again, roughly almost 6 weeks around the corner here, away from the official start of hurricane season here, Brandon. And with that upcoming, we've already got our first one of our first forecasts here for the upcoming season.
Yeah, it's just so wild how quick hurricane season is coming in, approaching here. And obviously, there's a lot of factors this year, potentially El Nino, and then you still have the warm ocean water temperatures. And Colorado State University, they release a forecast every single year. Andrew's got a calendar update for him every year to remind him of the day when it's going to be released. And this was their forecast for this upcoming season. Colorado State's forecast includes 13 named storms, 6 hurricanes projected, and 2 major hurricanes. Now, this is just slightly, and I mean very slightly below what we typically see during Atlantic hurricane season when you look at the 1991 to 2020 average. But it's still a pretty active season, Andrew. And obviously, there's a lot of factors that are going to go into it. And to talk about those factors today, we got a special guest joining us.
Giving Fort Collins some love.
Yeah. Dr. Levi Silvers, researcher with Colorado State University. Dr. Silvers, man, thanks so much for coming on the show with us today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's fun to be part of it.
Yeah, so we're talking about the Colorado State University hurricane projections for this upcoming hurricane season. Again, we mentioned it's hard to believe hurricane season is almost here. We're just showing your numbers here. What are you guys expecting in regards to this hurricane season? We notice it's a little below average when it comes down to activity. What are some of the main drivers for that?
As you've probably heard, El Nino is the primary driver for kind of bringing down the overall activity. So that's driving our expectations right now. We're still quite a ways before the start of the hurricane season, and we're really a long time before the peak of the hurricane season. But there's a really strong forecast out there for the coming El Nino. And so if that materializes, like people at NOAA and the people who are looking at the observations in the Pacific, if it materializes as they expect, then we're going to have a strong event in the Pacific, and that will most likely really bring down the chances of strong storms forming.
And when it comes down to the El Nino projected, I wanted to pull up a graphic here that Andrew and I have been using here recently, just showing the warmer ocean water that is expected over the central and eastern parts of the equatorial Pacific there, and how that's going to lead to more wind shear out in the Atlantic Ocean. Are there any other contributing factors, though, that could maybe counteract the El Nino that's expected and the increase in vertical wind shear?
Yeah, there certainly are. One is it's not really a different factor, but just the reality that this is a forecast of El Nino, so we don't know how strong it's going to get. And so if things in the Pacific don't develop as we think, that could really change how what kind of final numbers we have for this season. But as far as a true differing factor, something that's different than El Nino that could counteract it, that would be the sea surface temperature in the Gulf region, in the Caribbean region, and in the tropical Atlantic. And so we'll be watching those sea surface temperatures closely, which are really connected to the low-level winds, the trade winds. And if those sea surface temperatures get really warm, and kind of go beyond we kind of think of it as like a threshold, then that could um, kind of overpower what El Nino is doing. And so on one hand, we have sea surface temperatures that are favoring tropical cyclones. On the other hand, we have increased vertical wind shear from El Nino that is disfavoring tropical cyclones. So it's a little bit of a seesaw between the two. And usually El Nino wins, but not always.
Yeah, and with that, talking back about El Nino here, Dr. Silvers, can you explain just a little bit for the people at home how a moderate or strong El Nino increases vertical wind shear, kind of in the main development area when we talk about the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, sort of the Western Atlantic, how that kind of mechanism works essentially?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think a lot of people on the East Coast of the United States may not be very familiar with El Nino, and certainly if they do learn a little bit about it, they realize it's a long ways from home, right? It's really all the way over in the tropical Pacific. So it's counterintuitive that that would influence the tropical Atlantic. It does so because it's kind of shifting everything that happens. So there's these overturning circulations in the atmosphere kind of throughout the tropics. It's often referred to as the Walker circulation. But in any case, there's certain regions where there's rising motion in the tropics and other regions where there's sinking motion in the tropics. And then between those regions, you have winds kind of connecting the rising and sinking motion. And when El Nino occurs, especially a strong El Nino, what it does is it shifts that whole pattern. And so it shifts where you have the easterly and westerly winds. And it turns out that the majority of the time, the shifting of those winds will cause the wind in the Atlantic and Caribbean region to increase with height more than usual. And so when those winds are increasing with height more than usual, you have a big change when you go from the surface up high. And that tends to kind of pull the storms apart before they can really get going.
When it comes down to the El Ninos, we've seen some very strong ones in the past. And sometimes, what we can tend to expect during El Nino events doesn't always happen. I was looking back at the 2023 hurricane season. That was a particularly stronger El Nino. And looking at that season, we still had 19 named storms
Yeah.
that year. That was a particularly very active season, the fourth most active Atlantic hurricane season at the time, with Idalia making landfall and Ophelia making landfall. Idalia, the one that a lot of folks remember a lot, because that one, entered the Big Bend area of Florida, causing an impact to the eastern U.S. So,
Yeah.
you mentioned the ocean water temperatures, and we've been seeing that change here over the last several decades, and we've been seeing way warmer than normal water temperatures. Do you think that could lead to a more active season this year, even with the wind shear? I know you were mentioning a little bit earlier.
Yeah, it definitely could. And that's why I'd say that's one of the factors why our forecast is just a little bit below at the average and not significantly below the average, is because we don't know what the sea surface temperature is going to do. But the last several years, it's been really, really warm, and that has had a big influence on the hurricanes and the tropical storms. Right now, we have kind of mixed signals, and so right now, yeah, is this the current temperature that you just put up there?
Oh yeah,
Yes.
these are the anomalies. Yeah.
Yeah. So here, this is great. We have a figure kind of like this in our forecast, the full document, where you can see some regions are above normal temperatures, the warm kind of reddish regions, and then other regions are below the normal temperature. If you look at, say, the 2024 season, if you looked in April, what this figure would have looked like, it was red everywhere, and it was really, really red in a lot of places. So we kind of have mixed signals right now. We wouldn't say it's for sure like gangbusters. The SST is off the charts, and it's going to spawn all of these storms. But there's quite a few regions where it is above normal, and what's really key is what's going to happen in a few months. And so that's what we have to watch, and it's really closely connected to the trade winds, and those are very hard to predict. So I think you're probably going to see as more groups put out forecasts. I suspect there will be some that will have average or slightly above average seasons forecasted, even though we have a strong El Nino coming. And if that's the case, I suspect it will be because they think the SSTs are going to get really, really warm. So we're going to have to watch that. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. But right now it's kind of mixed.
Yeah, and kind of talking a little bit just about some of the changes we've seen, because I was looking back at previous hurricane seasons when we had either kind of a strong or very strong El Nino. And, Brandon was just talking about the 2023 season where we had a kind of a strong El Nino, still had an above average season.
Yeah.
And really, even we had a very strong El Nino in 2015. And even during that season, with one of the strongest El Niños we've seen since the 1997 season, we still had 11 named storms, 4 hurricanes, 2 major hurricanes. I was just looking at contrast. If you go back to kind of some strong El Niños in like 1987, 1972, those would usually correspond with well below average hurricane seasons. So I guess my question to you is it getting to the point where some of the, as Brandon was pointing out, the warming of the ocean water is getting to the point more and more as we've kept going farther and farther into the 21st century, where it's starting to overwhelm that kind of wind shear effect you were talking about that we usually see from El Nino, where we can still get now moderate to even strong El Ninos, but still average to even slightly above average hurricane season because of that warming of the ocean water.
Yeah, I mean that's really an active part of research right now. So that's something that we are working on, not even that just for the forecast, but just as a research question in general. You know, is there a threshold above which, if the sea surface temperature gets above that threshold, does that then become the dominant factor for a forecast? And so, you know, we'll see, but it's hurricanes are a tricky business, especially if you're just talking about the number of named storms. And so the total global number of named storms does not appear to be rising over the last several decades. It actually seems like it's decreased to just a little bit, and that's including the Pacific and all the other basins of tropical cyclones. Um, but we know we've been getting a lot of very, very strong storms, especially in the Atlantic basin. So it's tricky to untangle exactly what's going on, but certainly the sea surface temperatures, that's one of the clearest things we can look at, where if you look at the average numbers, it's clearly much warmer than usual, and it's been getting warmer over time. And you know, we have every reason to anticipate that continuing. So it's going to be interesting to see. I feel like it's important also to say we don't know what's going to happen with El Nino in the future. That's another really active area of research is trying to predict, are we going to have more El Ninos in the future? Are they going to be strong, or are they going to be weaker? Will we have more La Ninas? And the verdict is still kind of out. There's a lot of theoretical and work based on climate models that suggest we'll have more El Ninos in the future. If that's the case, then overall we'd expect fewer storms in the Atlantic region, but more in the Pacific. There is some other evidence, though, based on observations, that implies that may not be the case, or we might have more La Ninas. So that's kind of separate from the SST in the Atlantic, right? As we're talking about, but those are two big things going forward in the future. If we want to know what's going to happen in the next few decades, we want to know what's going to happen with the SST. That's a pretty clear answer, right? It's going to keep warming for the most part. And then what's going to happen with El Nino in the future?
Dr. Levi Silvers, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Bringing us a lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to be Andrew and I are going to be chatting a little bit more about El Nino and some of the other impacts it could bring here on the episode here on Pinpoint Weather University. But all about that climate variability, just when it comes down to La Nina and El Nino, and just how it could change hurricane seasons in the future. Obviously, hurricane seasons years they've become more active due to some of the record warmth, but the climate variability of El Nino and La Nina, we know that below average seasons are still possible. And as you guys mention all the time, it only takes one hurricane to make landfall here in the US or even out in the Caribbean to create an active season.
Yeah. Yeah, the climate variability is tough. There's always going to be really interesting research questions. Another interesting point here is if you look at the region over which this average is taken, right? It's from 1991 to 2020. We just took that from NOAA. That's what NOAA is using right now. A few years ago, they were using an earlier period from 1980 up through 2010. So that the average numbers then were different, right? That's a different period for the climatology, and they were lower. So the whole average is shifting up. And so our forecast is close to average or slightly below. But if you looked at the average from previous decades, it would look like it was even maybe a little bit above average. So that 30-year period, that's constantly shifting too. And the SST values you looked at, if you calculated it over 30-year windows, what it would be, you'd see that that's going up as well. So that also kind of influences whether we're thinking of this as above average, average, or below average.
All right, Dr. Levi Silvers, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Andrew, if you want to reach out, guys, the interview.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Silvers. Really
Thanks
appreciate
for having me. It was fun to be on the show.
Very, very good discussion. We're going to be talking, me and Andrew are going to be talking a little bit more about El Nino and just how it could warm the globe here over the next couple of years. Details on that coming up next here on Pinpoint Weather University. welcome back into Pinpoint Weather University. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson alongside my good friend, meteorologist Andrew Brightman. We're going to continue to talk about the upcoming El Nino that's likely for later this year. We just talked about how it could impact the hurricane season, a really good discussion with our good colleague there, Dr. Levi Silvers over at Colorado State University. And now we're going to talk about the impact it could have on the globe when it comes down to heat.
Getting warm, Brandon.
Yeah, it's going to be toasty here over the next couple of years, 2026 and 2027. And Andrew, we've been looking at the charts here, and this is a look at the odds of El Nino. So this is the look from the Climate Prediction Center there from NOAA. And essentially what we're looking at the seasons here. It's always a little confusing when we first look at it, but if you look at the bottom there, that is looking at seasons. So you're looking at March, April, May on the x-axis for that first one. Then you've got April, May, June, July, August, and into September. So it's just kind of going month by month or 3-month pairings. And essentially, you're seeing that big red bar there that is increasing as we get later in the year. And that red bar is the odds of El Nino gradually increasing for later this year.
As
And
someone who knows a
yeah.
thing or two about odds, you'd say, Brandon, pretty likely here we're
Yeah.
going to be in El Nino relatively shortly.
Yeah, we just had an episode about Calci on Calci a couple of
Yeah.
weeks ago, Andrew, and I guarantee you that there's not much of a trade market for it right now, just
I don't
because
think so.
everybody is probably betting on El Nino to happen. I think the big question with El Nino is just how strong is it going to get? And this is another chart that shows the strength possibility. So you still see the red bars that are increasing as we get later in the year, showing the odds of El Nino increasing. But you're also seeing kind of different shades of color. And I'll bring this one a little bit more full screen just so it's a little easier to see. So you see the darker red bar towards the end of the year. That is the odds of a potential very strong El Nino. We do think it's going to be at least a strong El Nino. You're looking at 1.5 degrees Celsius to 2.0 degrees Celsius above normal when it comes down to the water temperatures out in the parts of the central and eastern equatorial Pacific. But if you get that dark red shade, that means that we're looking at a very strong El Nino.
Historically strong El Nino.
Historically strong, and we're also hearing Super El Nino, another way of saying it. as well.
People just trying to get those clicks online, Brandon.
Yeah, Super El Nino has been the big story. I mean, I've seen it all over the headlines on social media, Andrew. Super El Nino incoming. This means very strong El Nino.
Yeah.
We have seen them before.
We don't
we've had-
overhype things here on Pinpoint Weather University.
we've had-
Super is not a real term.
Yeah, and we've had very strong El Ninos in the past.
Most
It's
recently,
happened in
2015 was the last time.
Yeah.
And, we were talking about this last segment here with Dr. Silvers. Even in 2015, with basically the strongest El Nino event here, which usually, climatologically speaking, is supposed to drive down hurricane activity, so had 11 named storms, 4 hurricanes, and 2 of them became major hurricanes here. And that was kind of the interesting thing. We're starting to see a little bit less and less correlation with hurricane activity. We're still getting a lot of activity developing here. And as you were talking about, it really only takes one, but might be seeing a weakening of that correlation, Brandon, between the strong El Nino events and what we see in terms of a decrease in hurricane activity in the Atlantic Basin.
Yeah, and I was mentioning it earlier too, Andrew, just about how it only takes one hurricane
Yep.
for an active season, and we showed that 2023 season earlier when we were speaking with Dr. Levi Silvers. And here's a look at that season again. Now this is showing just one particular hurricane from that year, but this was Hurricane Idalia. It made landfall in the Big Bend area of Florida, right there about the Keaton Beach area. That storm surge of about 8 feet near the Steinhatchee River area. And then you had the rainfall events that happened over the coastal areas of the Carolinas, Holly Hill in South Carolina, getting almost 14 inches of rain. It was a significant event, and this was an El Nino year, or a pretty strong El Nino. And unfortunately, we still had at least one major hurricane make landfall that year, and a couple other tropical cyclones make landfall. Now, something we were mentioning just at the top of this segment here, we were talking about how it could potentially lead to one of the warmest years on record incoming, and it has to do with the Pacific Ocean being so warm. So, Andrew, we talk about all the time about how warmer than normal sea surface temperatures are a big factor out in the parts of the eastern and central equatorial Pacific, and that stored heat is eventually released into the atmosphere. As that heat's released into the atmosphere, it warms the atmosphere, and that could lead to 2026 and potentially 2027 because of how strong the El Nino will be into the new year, being one of the warmest years on record.
I'm already sweating just thinking about it, Brandon.
Yeah. And, El Nino, it can accelerate global warming in an aspect. And looking at this chart here from Climate Central, Andrew, we already see it, quite well here. The red dots, those are when we had very strong El Ninos. The blue dots are when we had very strong La Ninas. Those more light, darker blue shades, or yeah, more of the transparent blue shades there towards the line itself is more the weaker events. But notice El Nino, Andrew, whenever we had El Nino as a factor and it was very strong,
Yep.
the global temperature was above the pre-industrial average by quite a bit.
Yeah, it was here, and we can see it very strong. Obviously the entire trend is up, but there's fairly strong correlations here between El Nino years and above the line here, and then vice versa. You do see a couple of outliers with El Nino years being a little bit cooler than the mean average there, and same thing with La Ninas. But generally, when we have El Nino, it's going to be a very warm year generally here across the globe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And when you look at that white line there, that is the global average temperature rising above the pre-industrial average there. So the pre-industrial average, obviously, you've got zero, but then as you're getting above that, just in 2022, just looking at some of the latest data here, 1.0 degrees above that pre-industrial average was the global temperature itself. And you look at the red dots here, notice they've been kind of helping drive that quite well, the El Nino. And also, we talk about the global temperature potential rising. And when you look at global temperature in general, we've had already some of our warmest years on record within the last decade here. I mean, 2024 was the warmest year on record. Back in 2025 last year, we had the third warmest year on record as a globe. 2023, number two. So, Andrew, the last 3 years, we've had the warmest years on record, technically,
Yeah.
at least top three. And really, the only year missing from this list is 2021, I
Yep.
believe. So, obviously, we've been warming things up already. El Nino could just be boosting these temperatures up even more, and we could possibly be sliding 2026 and 2027 in that number one spot here in the next couple.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. It's going to be, it's just what we see here with El Ninos. It's likely going to be getting very warm. Also, really concerned about, we talk so much about it might be a very, very wet winter next winter here as we get to the West Coast here. We see a lot of moisture here now for my skiers and snowboarders. If you're already looking ahead to the 2026, 2027 ski season, California could be a great place to go. Sort of the Rocky Mountains as we go Utah, Colorado, some of those areas along with California could be an amazing winter in terms of snow. But on the flip side, we talk so much about atmospheric rivers. We see a lot of those during El Nino years. Could be kind of a really dangerous kind of landslide season as we get out to portion of the West Coast with how much precipitation they might see. And that's what we see with these strong El Nino events. We have very active subtropical jet stream,
Yeah.
and something that likely we could see here for the southern half of California and the Southwest.
Yeah, Andrew, and I'll just kind of pull up the maps that you're talking about here. The subtropical jet stream does get enhanced when you're talking about an El Nino event, and that can lead to wetter conditions across the southern U.S. Not really for us until we get to the winter season. So coming up after the break, we're going to talk about some of our main takeaways from this episode and just what we could be expecting as we get into El Nino coming up on the other side of the break. Here on Queen City News Plus, you're watching Pinpoint Weather University. Welcome back into Pinpoint Weather University. I'm meteorologist Grant Lawson, alongside meteorologist Andrew
We're on an
Green.
adjunct basis.
I want to say, I feel like you could be like a primary professor. I mean, you're already doing your thing on ground
Oh,
control.
tenure, yeah.
Takes a lot. You are a bright man.
Thank you, buddy.
You are a bright man. So give us your main takeaways from the episode today when it comes down to El Nino. What are you thinking we're going to see later this year?
So I still think we see an average season, at least multiple major hurricanes, because I've just been doing a little bit of research, talking with Dr. Silvers. The ocean water in the Atlantic is becoming so much of a driver here of activity. It's not to the point where it overwhelms the El Nino effect that in terms of driving down hurricane activity, but it's getting closer and closer. I still think we'll see multiple hurricanes or maybe even multiple major hurricanes this summer because of how warm the ocean water here in the Atlantic basin continues to get. Not not historically warm, but still above average as we get closer to hurricane season. Then, as we were talking about sort of the global effects here with a very strong El Nino, likely going to be pushing us back up to an all-time record high in terms of global temperature as we get into maybe 2027 and maybe even the end of this year as well. And then, really concerned about the potential for flooding and landslides here as we get to the western portion of the United States once we get into this upcoming fall and winter with this potentially very strong El Nino.
I don't disagree, Andrew. I think we have probably an average season hurricane wise, just because the ocean water temperatures are likely going to be very warm once again, and then El Nino itself going to be helping possibly boost some of those ocean water temperatures by warming the globe. And then you think about the Carolinas here, maybe some more nor'easters can bring us a little bit of winter
Yeah, it
weather.
might be too, I don't know,
We'll
was it
see.
strong and very
Yeah,
strong?
hopefully it's not
Usually,
too, yeah.
the Goldilocks, if you're a snow lover
Mhm.
like me for the Mid-Atlantic, the Goldilocks, you really love a weak El Nino.
You want a weaker one,
Yeah.
but a strong one still could provide some pretty active tracks, though.
Yeah, well,
It's just going to be warm. That's the main thing.
you want to talk
Yeah.
supercharged subtropical jet. A lot of those F words come after one after the other, but supercharged subtropical jet could be a big thing next winter.
And this was a super episode
Yeah.
of Pinpoint Weather University. We've been talking about El Nino and just what we're expecting coming up for later this year. This is something we'll be talking about a lot here over the next several months. I'm meteorologist Brad Lawson, alongside my good buddy, meteorologist Andrew Brightman. Great episode, my man. Take care of yourselves out there. Take care of each other as we continue to navigate the earth together, my friends. And we'll see you next time here on Pinpoint Weather University.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.